Hello everyone, my name is Capicola and welcome to Cold Cut D&D's very first video. I'm really excited to start this channel and I'm really excited to share some ideas with you guys and see what you think. I think this video is going to be the first in the series that I call Capicola Collection, where I take some of the magic items, spells, monster stat blocks that I've run in my campaigns, or maybe ones that I haven't run in my campaigns yet, and I show them to you all. But before we get to that, let's get a word from our sponsors. I don't know why I said that. I started this channel last week, I don't have any sponsors. Ruinous Examination, a 4th level evocation spell, casting time of 1 action, range of 60 feet, and can be cast by the Artificer and the Wizard. The components are somatic material, the material being a magnifying glass worth at least 25 gold pieces, and the duration is instantaneous. A powerful tool to the analytical spellcaster, this spell combines all known magical damage types into a single spell to determine their individual effects on the target. These magical damage types are acid, cold, fire, force, lightning, necrotic, poison, psychic, radiant, and thunder. An iridescent prism extends out from the magnifying glass toward a creature within range. That creature must succeed on a Constitution saving throw or take 20 damage with the following rules. For every resistance the creature has to the above-mentioned damage types, reduce the damage by 1. For every vulnerability the creature has to the above-mentioned damage types, increase the damage by 1. For every immunity the creature has to the above-mentioned damage types, decrease the damage by 2. The caster then learns each of the resistances, vulnerabilities, and immunities the creature has to the above-mentioned damage types. On a successful save, the target takes 10 damage following the same rules mentioned above, and the caster only learns half of the creature's resistances, vulnerabilities, and immunities rounded down, left to decide by the Dungeon Master. For instance, if a creature has 3 resistances, 1 vulnerability, and 4 immunities, the caster would learn of 1 resistance, 0 vulnerabilities, and 2 immunities. So to start, I want to go over the name, Ruinous Examination. Now, this name is something that I came up with. I have this very, very intricate and complex theory on making good names for spells and magic items that I wanted to share with you all.
Ruinous.
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 Ruinous. That's alright. I thought a lot about the level. I think 4th is a good fit, seeing as how when you get 4th level spells as a wizard, you'll be 7th level, but Artificer, I think it's like level 13 you get 4th level spells, so it's kind of farther down the line, but I like having it somewhat later in level so that you save it for, maybe you go against a monster and it's a high level monster and you don't really know what its resistances, what its capabilities are. I think 60 feet makes sense, as in thinking about like you have this magically enhancing magnifying glass and it allows you to see 60 feet away to pinpoint weaknesses and strengths and things like that. I think Artificer and Wizard would be the ones, the 2 intelligence-based spellcasters who would want access to the spell, to be able to see a creature from a distance, figure out its composition, and determine, well, oh, my Ray of Frost isn't going to work against this thing, or, a Fireball will turn this thing to ash. The components, somatic material, and the material is magnifying glass. If you look in the player's handbook, the magnifying glass is worth 100 gold pieces, and here's what I had envisioned when I thought of this. I imagine having a magnifying glass that's kind of beat up and the lens is actually shattered down the center and then splits outward, kind of like a peace sign. And in the upper left corner of the lens, it'll show like, maybe in like arcane script, the words acid, cold, fire, saying this is the things it's resistant to. And then in the upper right corner, it'll say force, lightning, necrotic, and these are the things that it's vulnerable to. And then bottom, it'll say the things that it's immune to. Just kind of split up in that way that, I don't know, makes it easier to read, or I don't know, it's just something that I thought would be cool. And the duration is instantaneous. I can't see a reason why this would last more than 6 seconds. But the first sentence is just a little bit of fluff, telling you what the purpose of the spell is and why it was made. And then you probably noticed the magical damage types are all the damage types minus bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. An iridescent prism, I feel like it just kind of makes sense looking through a magnifying glass and kind of like a Pink Floyd album, just shooting this ray of colors that just impacts. I think Constitution also makes sense for the saving throw, seeing as how it's like trying to take apart its composition and figure out what it's weak to and what it's strong to, things like that. Usually you see a spell and it says, 2d8 thunder damage or 1d6 bludgeoning damage or whatever. But I wanted to show you guys how I got 20 damage. Alright, so this is what I made up for you guys. It's just a little table that shows that if Ruinous Examination does 20 damage and it has 10 damage types, then that must mean that each damage type does 2 damage. That's 2 acid, 2 cold, all the way down to 2 thunder. The more I think about this spell, the more I think it's just a big math problem for the DM to figure out. But I'm going to use an example. Let's say my wizard encounters a shadow, something that they've never encountered before. They don't know its vulnerabilities or resistances, so it's going to cast that, and if their shadow fails, it's going to start at base 20 damage. And after that, the DM should look down at its vulnerabilities and see it's vulnerable to radiant, so it'll increase that damage. That's not right. It increased that damage by 2 because it's vulnerable, so it'll take double damage. This is why I'm glad that I'm making this video, so I can go back, and I think the best way to figure out what you're trying to say is to just try to explain it and see if it's vulnerable. It should increase the damage by 2, not by 1, because it'll take double damage. So 2 doubled is 4. Sorry, so after that, you figure out how many resistances it has. It's resistant to acid, cold, fire, lightning, and thunder. And what I think I did well, I think what works with this spell is it already factors in now correctly if it's vulnerable and takes double damage from that kind of damage, and if it's resistant, it'll take half, and it's immune, it'll take none. So acid 1, cold 1, fire 1, lightning 1, and thunder 1. And it's immune to necrotic and poison, so let's go ahead and take poison, necrotic to 0, and we just have
1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 1.
Easy. So if we did the math this way, it would be 1 acid plus 1 cold plus 1 fire plus 2 force plus 1 lightning plus 0 necrotic and poison plus 2 psychic plus 4 radiant and plus 1 thunder for a total of 13 damage. But I still think the way that I mentioned earlier will be the easiest way for the Dungeon Master to figure out how much damage this spell actually does. If we take the base damage of 20 minus the number of resistances, which is 5, plus 2 times the number of vulnerabilities, which is 2, and then minus 2 for each of the immunities, which would be minus 4 is 13 damage. And then the Dungeon Master will tell me what damage types the shadow is vulnerable, resistant, and immune to. Sorry, that was a lot of lame math, but let's get back to on a successful save, the target takes 10 damage and follows the same rules. I think I want to keep the rules that I have, now that they're fixed, for every resistance, minus 1, for every vulnerability, plus 2, and then every immunity, minus 2, yeah. I still think if something is vulnerable, that it should still deal that 2 extra damage, because there aren't even a lot of vulnerabilities. Like, there are a bunch of plant-based monsters that are vulnerable to fire, and then there's a bunch of devils, maybe not devils, what are they? Shadows, obviously, that are vulnerable to radiant, but other than that, there aren't too many vulnerabilities. So I feel like if you cast a spell and it's vulnerable, it's much more apparent, it's more abundantly clear, so you can definitely see that that is vulnerable, it takes 2 extra damage, and, you know, it's probably going to reduce the damage to maybe 1 if you're fighting something big, bad, and has a bunch of immunities and resistances, and, you know, half the resistances, vulnerabilities, and immunities. So I think the spell would be good for kind of newer players. I know it's high level, but especially in higher levels when you are facing, you know, pit fiends and krakens and aboleths and things like that, that they don't know what those things are. Like, they've never seen them before in their lives. So if they're able to cast a spell and determine what to use against it, that would help their experience. But I feel like it also helps with people who are trying to mitigate metagaming. So say you're a more experienced player and you know all about flumps for some reason, and you know that they have vulnerability to psychic damage, you'd be able to cast a spell and through the rules of the spell know that that thing is vulnerable to psychic damage. And I feel like it's just a spell that is missing from D&D. I don't think, I did a little bit of research, I haven't seen anything like it from prior editions or versions, but I don't know. I think it's a good addition. I think it's something that was missing from D&D, and maybe it was missing for a reason. I'm really looking for you guys' input here. I want to know what you hate about this, and I want you guys to pick it apart and tell me how you like it, how you hate it. Now, say you're a Dungeon Master and you don't feel comfortable adding a completely new spell to your campaign. You don't want any wizard, any artificer to have the ability to cast a spell for whatever reason. I'm going to show you guys a trick that I use for, you know, lesser known spells, or like spells that I don't see used as often as I want to see them used, or spells that have low utility or low damage. I'm going to show you guys my trick. So let's take Ruinous Examination and turn it into a magic item. This is the format that I use, you know, big red lettering saying the name, the focus of Ruinous Examination. I say if it requires attunement, I determine the slot. And the reason I say the slot is because you can't wear, you know, 2 headpieces or 2 pairs of boots or whatever. But my trick is to take the spell and just put it into a magic item for people to use. And I just give a physical description of what the magic item looks like. This magnifying glass's lens is cracked nearly perfectly into thirds with rudimentary magical glyphs carved into its silver handle. This powerful tool was once used to determine the effects of magical damage onto its targets in preparations for combat. That's better. And after the description, it's pretty much the same thing, except for one thing that I actually missed before I started this video. Magic items, you gotta say how many times you can use them. Otherwise, your players will use them all the time. And that's cool and all, but it might be overpowered. And for the last thing, when you're converting a spell to a magic item, you have to make sure that you set the DC. Otherwise, the players will be confused about what the DC should be. So I just had DC 15 Constitution saving throw. And I know you guys might be thinking, oh, this video was just you making a wacky spell and then turning into a magic item and saying it's fine, but I've actually done this a number of times with spells that Wizards of the Coast has released in the Player's Handbook, and I wanted to show you guys them too. So here's Melf's Acid Arrow. It's a second level evocation spell that I haven't seen a lot of use from my players. I haven't used it a lot. Aside from Caleb on Critical Role Season 2, that's the only time I've ever really seen it. So I thought to take that spell and put it into an arrow, and if it hits a creature, it deals the acid damage like as if the spell was cast. So the vitriolic. Yeah, vitriolic sounds right. A shimmering stained green arrow with dark sizzling acid occasionally dripping off the arrowhead. The description. On a hit, the target takes the damage from the arrow, plus an additional 4d4 acid damage immediately, and 2d4 acid damage at the end of its next turn. On a miss, the arrow splashes the target with acid for half as much as the initial damage, and no damage at the end of its next turn. And finally, the how many times can you use this? Once this arrow deals damage to a creature, it becomes a non-magical arrow. So, a one-time use, Melf's Acid Arrow. I think this is the first way that I made a magic item in D&D. They were called the Tremoring Sabatons, and as a bonus action once per day, you could cast. There was a spell in the Elemental Evil Player's Companion called, what was it called? Earth Tremor. And what it did was, in a 10-foot radius around the caster, you caused everyone to make, I think it was a Dex saving throw, or take 1d6 bludgeoning damage, and fall prone. And I thought that was not a good first level spell, compared to like Magic Missile and Burning Hands and things like that. So I said, well, this spell isn't great, but what if it was a magic item? And what if instead of an action taking up your whole action, you could cast it as a bonus action? And you just stomp the ground and the shockwave goes shooting out and knocks some people prone, deals a little bit of damage. And in that campaign, I had a Dragonborn Sorcerer who I think liked the magic item so much and thought it had so much utility that he multiclassed into Fighter so that he could bonus action, stomp, knock some things prone, and then take his big old greatsword and swing in anything that he knocked prone. Yeah, the best thing about magic items and spells is seeing your players use them and then just get so much fun out of them. And the best part of magic items is seeing like this small, maybe not so important magic item just become part of your players' kits or part of your players' personalities, or just it becomes one of their favorite things. And, that in itself kind of makes plot hooks saying, oh, what if it went missing? Or what if someone stole them? What if they got drunk and they lost them somewhere? And, stories write themselves. So that's going to end the first video. It's kind of a long one. I've kind of been editing and recording later into the day, but I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm really looking forward to your guys' feedback, how you think about Ruinous Examination, and how you think of the tip that I kind of gave throughout the video. Also, before anyone yells at me, I know I didn't create that tip of taking a spell and putting it into a magic item. Matt Mercer's done it like 5 times in his latest campaign. He's got like the Glove of Blasting and the Magician's Judge. And Wizard of the Coast started with items that can cast spells. But I just wanted to put it out there myself that, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to make this crazy complicated magic item for your players to enjoy. It's something that you could do maybe in 10 minutes, thinking about like the DC, its appearance, and what it does. Does it do the magical effect on a hit, or can they just cast it straight, or things like that. And one final thing before we go, in the description there's a link to my Twitter where you guys can follow me for, I'm thinking about posting extras or video announcements and release dates, things like that. And there's a hair. and a link to my link tree that'll have copies of the things that I talk about in my videos. You can go there and look at them yourself, or copy them and send them to other people, or whatever you want to do with them. But I figure if I'm making a channel and making all this content, I should have copies that I can have for you also. They'll all be in Google Docs, I think. But thank you guys so much for watching. Please leave any comments about video ideas or things that you want to see me talk about in future videos, and subscribe for more. Thanks.